There are places in this world where beauty and death exist side by side, where sunlight touches the ruins of tragedy and history breathes through the dust of forgotten walls. They are the destinations no map warns you about, and no traveler's guide dares to describe. Yet for reasons we can never fully explain, we are drawn to them, to walk where others vanished, to listen where silence was born, to feel what lingers when time refuses to move on. This is not a journey for comfort. It is a pilgrimage into the shadows of human memory. Across continents and centuries, every culture leaves behind its ghosts. Some hide in castles, some whisper through forests, and some drift beneath the surface of calm water. They wait for us to return, to remember, to ask why. Dark tourism is not about fear. It is about fascination, the desire to stand at the edge of history and look down. It is the strange impulse to see the beauty in decay, to understand that every tragedy leaves behind a story. Every cursed place was once a living world filled with laughter, breath, and light. And somewhere, within those remains, the echoes of that life still call to us. In this series, we will travel to 30 destinations where legend and death intertwine. Islands that forbid trespass. Hotels that whisper to sleeping guests. Mansions that built themselves around grief. Forests where the compass forgets direction. Lakes that hold their dead like mirrors. And names that reappear only when the world is dark enough to remember them. Each story is real, and each place exists. Their legends are built on truth, layered with fear, and preserved by the people who refuse to let them fade. We will hear the voices of history, the miners who never escaped, the sailors who sent their final message, the families who vanished without reason. We will walk the empty halls and read the names etched into stone. We will listen to what the living left behind. But there is something else we must remember. Every story we tell about death is, at its heart, a story about life. These places endure because we keep visiting them. We keep asking questions. We keep lighting candles in the dark. Maybe that is the true meaning of dark tourism. Not to celebrate tragedy, but to stand in its aftermath and to feel the weight of what it means to be human. To understand that the past is never buried, it only sleeps. And when we listen closely enough, the world still speaks through the walls, the wind, and the water. So take a deep breath. The journey begins here. From haunted mansions and drowned villages to mountains that breathe and tunnels that scream, we will travel across the map of memory one story at a time. These are not just places you can visit. They are experiences that remember you long after you leave. Welcome to Dark Tourism Destinations with Deadly Legends, where the past never dies. It only waits for night to fall. Hidden deep in the Bay of Bengal lies a patch of green surrounded by turquoise water, North Sentinel Island, a place so untouched by modern civilization that even time seems afraid to move forward. Few have seen it closely, and those who tried never truly returned. The island is home to the Sentinelese, one of the last uncontacted tribes on Earth, a community that has lived in isolation for thousands of years. They speak a language unknown to linguists, follow rituals unseen by outsiders, and defend their home with a ferocity that has made the world keep its distance. In 1880, a British naval officer named Maurice Vidal Portman set foot on the island. He brought with him armed men and a scientific curiosity. Within the hours, the expedition captured several tribespeople. 2 elderly members died soon after from disease. Their bodies could not resist. The rest were returned to the island, terrified and grieving. From that moment, the Sentinelese learned that the world beyond their shores meant death. Over the decades, ships have drifted too close to the coral reefs surrounding the island. Fishermen looking for a good catch, travelers testing their courage, explorers seeking a story. Most encounters ended the same way. Arrows flying from the tree line. Silence. Then nothing but the sound of the sea swallowing the evidence. In 1918, a cargo ship named Primrose ran aground on the reef. For days, the stranded crew watched dark figures gather on the beach, bows drawn, fires burning at dusk. A monsoon storm arrived before the tribesmen could reach the wreck. The crew was rescued, but they spoke of eyes that glowed in the torchlight, watching them through the rain. The Indian government declared the island off limits. Soon after, no one may approach within 5 nautical miles. Helicopters that have flown too near report being shot at from below. Even humanitarian missions have failed. In 2004, after the tsunami devastated much of the region, rescue teams flew overhead to check for survivors. A single man emerged from the trees and aimed his arrow toward the sky. The message was clear. We are alive, stay away. In 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Chow attempted to visit the island. He believed he was chosen to bring faith to the isolated tribe. He hired local fishermen to take him close enough for a small kayak approach. What happened next was pieced together only from witness accounts. On his first attempt, the tribe shot an arrow that struck his waterproof Bible. He returned to the fishing boat, wrote in his journal that he did not fear death, and paddled back the next morning. He never came out again. The fishermen later saw his body dragged across the beach and buried in the sand. No one has retrieved it since. To this day, the Sentinelese remain untouched. No one knows how many live there, what gods they worship, or what stories they tell around their fires at night. The island stands as a living paradox, a paradise forbidden, a sanctuary guarded by silence. For centuries, people have asked what secrets lie behind that green wall of jungle. But the real mystery may be simpler. Perhaps the Sentinelese do not fear the world. Perhaps the world fears what it becomes when it cannot leave them alone. When the sun sets over the Bay of Bengal, the island disappears into shadow. Waves break softly against its reef, erasing every trace of those who dared approach. And in the darkness beyond the horizon, one truth remains. North Sentinel Island does not want to be found. And if you ever find it, it will make sure you never leave. High in the Colorado Rockies stands a grand white building surrounded by mist and pine. Its red roof gleams beneath the mountain sun. The Stanley Hotel, a place of elegance, of laughter, of whispered legends that never quite fade. For more than a century, guests have come for the view and left with something they could never explain. Some call it charm. Others call it a presence. In 1909, an inventor named Freeland Oscar Stanley built the hotel as a summer retreat for the wealthy. The air was thin and clean, the nights cool and silent. He designed every corridor, every brass handle, every lamp. But from the beginning, workers spoke of strange accidents. Tools moved overnight. Doors locked from the inside. Footsteps echoed down empty halls. Stanley dismissed it all as superstition. Yet he also ordered every room to have electricity and light because he feared the dark. When the lights go out in room 217, the air changes. These chambermaids once said they smelled lilac perfume and felt invisible hands fold the bedspread. One woman, Elizabeth Wilson, nearly died in that room in 1911 when a gas leak caused an explosion. She survived, but her spirit, they say, remained to finish her shift. Guests who stay in 217 report their bags unpacked, lights turned off, or blankets tucked around them while they sleep. One man woke to find his shoes neatly arranged by the door, shining as if polished by an unseen hand. At 3 a.m, the building hums with quiet life. The piano in the ballroom plays a single note. The elevator creaks though no one rides it. On the fourth floor, once a children's ward, laughter drifts through the hallway, followed by the sound of bouncing rubber balls. Security cameras capture movement in rooms long unoccupied. A shadow crossing the doorway. Curtains stirring against still air. Yet nothing registers on the temperature sensors. The air remains cold, but constant. In 1974, a writer named Stephen King checked in for one night near the end of the tourist season. The hotel was almost empty. As he walked through the long red-carpeted hallways, he imagined a story about a man losing his mind in an isolated resort. That night, he dreamed of his son running through the halls, screaming. When he woke, he knew the story. He called it The Shining. What King turned into fiction had already existed in the walls long before his visit. Employees who closed the hotel for winter speak softly about the off-season. They say the silence is heavier then, as if the building itself listens. One night, a caretaker heard a voice call his name from the lobby. He followed the sound and found only the reflection of himself in the glass. Another time, a maintenance worker, fixing the chandelier in the ballroom, heard faint music, a waltz from an old gramophone. When he looked down, he swore he saw silhouettes spinning across the marble floor. Skeptics call it imagination, the result of creaking wood and mountain wind. But those who have spent a night alone here know the difference between sound and intent. The Stanley is not a haunted house in the usual sense. It is polite, curious, almost proud of its reputation. It wants to show you its memories, if you stay long enough to listen. At 3 a.m., when the mountain air turns colder and the valley below sinks into darkness, the whispers begin. A soft murmur at your ear, a knock from inside the wardrobe, the faint rhythm of music echoing from somewhere above. It is not loud, never violent, always measured, as if the hotel itself breathes. You might reach for the light, find it flickers once, and in that brief second you will see it. The outline of a woman standing by the door, watching quietly, waiting to finish her work. If you ever find yourself at the Stanley Hotel, remember this. The view from the porch is beautiful, the mountain wind pure. But when the clock strikes 3, do not ask who else is awake. Because in room 217, someone always is. In the rolling hills of southern West Virginia sits an abandoned amusement park. Rusted rides stand frozen in time, half hidden by the tall grass and the soft hum of crickets. A Ferris wheel leans against the wind, its red paint faded to the color of dried blood. A swing ride still turns slowly when storms pass through, chains squeaking in the rain. This is Lake Shawnee Amusement Park, a place where laughter once echoed across the water, and where silence now holds every sound captive. Long before the rides were built, this land belonged to the Clay family. In the 1780s, they farmed the valley beside the lake, raising their children near a small trading path used by native tribes. One afternoon, when the father was away, a group of settlers clashed with the local tribe. The confrontation ended in tragedy. 3 of the Clay children were taken. 2 were later found lifeless by the water's edge. The 3rd disappeared forever. The land soaked up their grief, and people whispered that it never forgot. More than a century later, in the 1920s, a businessman named Conley Snitto purchased the property and built a small amusement park for the nearby coal mining community. He brought in a Ferris wheel, a carousel, and a swimming area. Families came every summer weekend. Children ran barefoot through the dust, their laughter carrying across the fields. For a time, the place seemed to heal the valley's old scars. But then the accidents began. The first was the lake. A young boy slipped from a tire swing and vanished beneath the surface. Searchers found him hours later, caught in the weeds below. The second tragedy came on the swings. A little girl in a pink dress was struck by a delivery truck that backed too close to the ride. Witnesses said the sound was like metal tearing. The park closed soon after, but every attempt to restore to open ended the same way, with more misfortune, more loss. By the 1960s, the park was abandoned. Weeds claimed the midway. The Ferris wheel rusted to a deep brown. And yet people who wandered in spoke of seeing the swing moving gently, even on windless days. Some heard a child's laughter near the lake, followed by a splash that never ended. Paranormal investigators later brought cameras and recorders. They captured cold spots, flickering lights, faint voices calling names no one recognized. One visitor left an offering of flowers near the swing set. When she returned the next morning, the flowers were gone. But in the dirt, she found a small child's handprint. In the 1980s, archaeologists excavating near the park discovered the truth beneath the ground. The land had once been a Native American burial site, hundreds of graves lying directly under the rides. The amusement park had been built unknowingly atop a resting place centuries old. The stories of strange accidents suddenly felt less like coincidence and more like memory. Today, Lake Shawnee remains closed to the public, though every October its gates open briefly for guided tours. Visitors walk among the rusted rides under dim lantern light. They say the air feels heavier here, as if the ground itself remembers. Guides warn guests not to touch the swings, not to whisper names, not to stay past dark. Yet each year someone always does. And when they do, the swing begins to move again, slow and deliberate, as though pushed by unseen hands still waiting for their turn. At dusk, the Ferris wheel stands like a skeleton against the red sky. The lake below reflects its broken frame. The past and present merge into one long echo of loss. Some believe the land is cursed. Others say it is simply unfinished, a place where joy and sorrow met and could never part. But one thing is certain. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park was built to bring happiness and ended as a monument to the kind of silence that never truly dies. If you ever find yourself driving through West Virginia and see a Ferris wheel rising from the weeds, do not stop. Keep the engine running. Because at Lake Shawnee, the laughter you hear is not for you. On a lonely road in the heart of Ireland stands a stone fortress older than memory. Its walls rise from the mist like the bones of the earth itself. This is Leap Castle, a place whispered to be the most haunted structure in the country. For centuries, it has seen bloodshed, betrayal, and quiet madness. And some say that when the night turns cold enough, the castle exhales. Built in the late 13th century by the O'Bannon clan, Leap Castle was more than a stronghold. It was a symbol of power, of lineage, and of old rivalries. The O'Bannons themselves were known for settling disputes in the most brutal way imaginable. Legend tells that two brothers once fought to decide who would rule. The duel ended at the highest battlement. One brother threw the other from the tower. And from that moment, the place was called Laim Uhi Panait, by Leap of the O'Bannons. The castle had earned its name in blood. When the O'Carroll family later seized the fortress in the 1500s, its history darkened further. They were powerful chieftains, but feared for their cruelty. Family feuds turned violent, and the stone halls soaked up every scream. One night, during a private mass in the chapel, a brother drew his sword and struck down his own kin, the priest leading the prayer. The chapel has been known ever since as the Bloody Chapel. Visitors who walk through its doorway report a sudden chill, a faint scent of burning oil, and the sound of distant chanting that stops the moment you listen for it. In the early 1900s, during renovation, workers broke through a hidden wall inside the chapel. Behind it lay a small chamber containing an oubliette, a narrow pit used for prisoners. At the bottom were thousands of human bones, piled like driftwood. Among them were the remains of men, women, and children, victims of centuries of cruelty. Some had been impaled on wooden spikes at the pit's base. When the bones were removed, workers reported hearing sighs echoing from the walls, as if the air itself mourned what it had seen. But the most feared presence inside Leap Castle is not a ghost from the chapel. It is something older, darker, and nameless. Locals call it the Elemental, described as a small gray figure with the stench of decay. It is said to appear before tragedy, a shadow that feeds on fear. In 1922, during the Irish Civil War, the castle was set ablaze. Witnesses claimed to see a figure in the smoke standing at the highest window. When the fire died, the same window was found blackened but unbroken. Those who enter that room today speak of pressure in the air, as though the castle itself is holding its breath. The current owners have tried to restore Leap Castle, to cleanse it of its darkness, but the atmosphere remains heavy. Visitors describe lights flickering on their own, doors creaking open even when sealed, whispers that seem to come from the stones. Paranormal researchers once spent a night inside and recorded rhythmic pulses in the air, low vibrations that sounded like breathing. Every few seconds, the castle exhaled a sound like wind passing through a throat. Historians argue that all haunted places are simply echoes of memory, that the walls remember pain in ways the living cannot. Yet at Leap Castle, the echo feels alive, shifting, or aware. Some believe the building itself has become sentient, feeding on the energy of those who enter, and when the mist rolls through the valley, curling around the towers, it almost looks like the castle is drawing in air. At dusk, the crows settle on the battlements, their wings beating against the gray sky. The last light fades through the broken stained glass of the chapel, painting the walls in crimson. If you stand still enough, you can hear the stones creak as if they are stretching after a long sleep. That is when you understand the truth. Leap Castle does not keep ghosts. It keeps memories. And every memory it holds must breathe. So if you ever feel the wind move through the empty halls of an old fortress in Ireland, listen closely. It might not be the wind at all. It might be Leap Castle, taking one more breath before the night begins again. Between the quiet fields and old rail lines of Niagara Falls lies a stone tunnel, narrow and cold, built more than a century ago for drainage beneath the Grand Trunk Railway. Its walls are rough limestone, blackened by time and by something else, something that feels like sorrow, turned solid. The locals call it the Screaming Tunnel, and they say that if you stand inside at midnight and light a single match, you will hear her scream before the flame dies. The legend begins with a farmhouse that once stood near the mouth of the tunnel. There are several versions of the story, but they all end the same way. A young girl, terrified, running into the tunnel with her nightdress catching fire. Some say her father set the blaze in a fit of rage. Others claim she was trapped inside the house as it burned and fled toward the tunnel, seeking the cool stone and the safety it promised. She never made it out. The next morning, only ashes and scorched footprints remained. Since that night, the tunnel has never been silent. Those who enter speak of hearing water dripping from invisible cracks, though the floor is dry. The air smells faintly of smoke. In the darkness, you can almost feel breath against your skin. A slow exhale that chills rather than warms. Teenagers dare each other to walk through alone. Most make it halfway, before running back into the moonlight, their laughter cracking into something close to fear. The railway stopped using the tunnel decades ago. Now it lies beneath a tangle of weeds and broken fences, forgotten by the city that grew around it. Yet the legend refuses to die. Locals still bring visitors here on autumn nights, their flashlights cutting narrow beams through the fog. The brave ones strike a match and wait. The rest listen from outside. They say that if the tunnel accepts you, the flame burns steady. If it does not, the air rushes forward and blows it out, followed by a sound no one can mistake, a scream that rises from the stone itself. In 1920, a reporter from Toronto came to document the phenomenon. He spent the night alone with a camera and a box of matches. At dawn, he emerged pale and shaking, his clothes damp with sweat. The only thing he managed to say was, "It's not a ghost, it's the place." When he developed the film, the final frame showed a blur of light, shaped like a human figure, standing at the tunnel's center, arms raised as if shielding from fire. Geologists have studied the tunnel, explaining the strange acoustics. The curved walls amplify sound, they say. A whisper at one end can echo like a cry. Temperature shifts create sudden drafts that extinguish flames. Rational explanations. Yet none account for the voice that many have recorded. Female and distinctly human, repeating the same single note of anguish. It lasts exactly 7 seconds, then fades, leaving the tunnel hollow once more. On windless nights, the smell of smoke drifts toward the nearby fields. Farmers who live close claim they hear it around the same time the midnight train passes. On the distant track, the train's whistle echoes, and for a moment, the two sounds blend, the modern and the ancient, the living and the lost. Then the whistle fades, but the scream lingers a few seconds longer, as though the past refuses to let the present move on. There are no signs pointing to the screaming tunnel. You find it only if you are looking for it, or if, perhaps, it wants to be found. When you step inside, the temperature drops. The air thickens. Every footstep comes back twice, once from ahead and once from behind. You strike the match. The flame trembles. For a heartbeat, the tunnel glows in the orange light, revealing wet stone, tangled roots, and something small handprint burned into the wall. The match flickers once more, and then, from the darkness, the sound begins. They say you can still hear her every night at the same hour, forever caught between the fire and the rain. And if you ever visit, remember one thing. When the scream starts, do not run toward the light. Because whatever waits at the other end of the screaming tunnel is not the girl you came to find. In the far north of Portugal, where granite mountains meet cold rivers, there once stood a village named Vilarinho da Furna. Today, only ripples mark the place where its streets once lay. Beneath the green water of a man-made lake sleep the remains of stone houses, cobbled alleys, and the memories of generations who lived and died there. Locals say that on clear days, when the surface is calm, you can still see the rooftops below, like ghosts waiting for air. The village was older than written history. Carved into the Gires Mountains, it stood isolated from the world, with no need for roads or machines. The people of Vilarinho da Furna shared everything: land, walls, labor, even grief. They had no mayor, no police. Decisions were made by the council of men who gathered beneath an ancient oak tree. For centuries, life there changed little. The world outside modernized, but time in the valley moved slowly, almost tenderly. Then came the dam. In the 1960s, engineers arrived with maps and promises of progress. The government planned to flood the valley, to create a reservoir for electricity. They told the villagers they would be relocated, that the water would bring prosperity to others. Many resisted. This was not just land. It was memory, roots, causes. But resistance meant little to the tide of the industry. One by one, the families packed their belongings and left, driving their cattle up the rocky slopes as the machines carved a concrete wall across the river. In 1971, when the dam closed, waters began to rise. It filled the valley slowly, like a patient executioner. First the fields, then the paths, then the lower homes. The villagers stood on the surrounding hills and watched their world vanish. Some wept, others stood silent. As the water reached the church bell tower, a man rowed a small boat into the center of the half-submerged village and rang the bell one last time. The sound carried across the valley, deep and hollow, fading into the mist as the roof disappeared beneath the surface. They say the lake never went quiet. After that, every few decades, when drought drains the reservoir, the dead village rises again. Stone walls emerge from the mud. Streets take shape. Doorways open to the wind. Former residents return to walk among the ruins, whispering the names of the homes they once knew. Photographs show the skeleton of the village standing in eerie silence under a gray sky, as though refusing to accept its fate. For a brief moment, Vilarinho da Furna lives again, until the rain returns and drowns it once more. Some claim that at night, when the moon reflects off the lake, lights flicker beneath the surface. Fishermen say they hear the faint clang of the bell tower, though it has been underwater for 50 years. Divers who have explored the depths report feeling watched, as if the lake itself remembers every face it swallowed. They speak of strange sounds, muffled voices, footsteps against the silt, a whisper that grows louder the deeper they go. Scientists call it acoustics, pressure changes, the movement of water through stone. But the villagers who lost their homes say otherwise. They believe the valley still breathes, that the spirits of Vilarinho da Furna gather below, waiting for the day the water recedes for good. And maybe that is why the lake feels uneasy, restless even in stillness, because it carries too many unfinished stories. When dawn comes, mist rises from the surface like smoke. From a distance, it looks as though the village is exhaling. The water shivers with light, revealing just enough of what lies below, before swallowing it again. The valley is quiet, yet not empty, because somewhere beneath those green waves, still moves as it once did. Fires are lit, doors creak open, children laugh beside dry wells. And when the wind blows through the reservoir at night, you can almost hear it, the sound of a bell, ringing for a village that drowned twice and refuses to die. In the deep heart of Louisiana, where moss hangs heavy from the oaks and the air smells of rain and magnolia, stands a grand white plantation house.
And now she was left with nothing but regret and the bitter taste of her own actions. But what hurt the most was the realization that it wasn't just the things she had lost. It was the trust, the bond between a mother and daughter that she had shattered. She had convinced herself that her actions were justified, that she was doing it for a better future. But now she understood. There was no future without the love and respect of the ones who mattered. She had sold everything for a life that would never fulfill her. The weight of her choices pressed down on her chest like an iron fist, suffocating her. She had taken it all for granted, and now it was slipping through her fingers, leaving her empty-handed. But there was no escaping the truth. She could no longer blame Robert, her mother, or anyone else. It was her greed that had brought her to this point, her desire to escape the mundane and the real consequences of her actions. As the evening wore on, Angela felt a strange shift inside her. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel the depth of her sorrow. The tears came slowly, almost hesitantly, as if her body had forgotten how to cry. But when they did come, they felt like a release, a painful but necessary acknowledgement of the damage she had caused. She had always believed that success was measured by what you owned, by the life you could build for yourself. But now, in the solitude of her own mind, she saw how wrong she had been. Success wasn't about possessions. It was about the people you loved, the trust you earned, and the relationships you nurtured. And she had thrown all of that away. Angela knew she had to face the consequences of her actions. She could no longer run from the truth. The man who had promised her the world had betrayed her, but it was her own choices that had sealed her fate. She had to rebuild, to find a way back to herself, even if that meant starting from the very bottom. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars from this experience would never fully heal. But Angela knew one thing for sure. nothing would ever be the same again. Angela sat quietly in the dimly lit room, her fingers nervously tracing the outline of the coffee cup in front of her. The world outside seemed far away, muffled by the weight of her thoughts. The mistakes she had made, the choices that had led her to this point, all crashed down on her at once. The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating. She had betrayed her mother, her own flesh and blood, in the worst way possible. But in that silence, something shifted. A realization began to creep in, slow and painful, but undeniable. For weeks now, she had been running away from the truth, hiding behind the glossy promises of the life she had dreamed of. She had believed that the material world, the house, the car, the luxury, would bring her happiness.
But the feeling inside the myrtles is harder to explain. It is heavy, humid, and strangely familiar, like returning to a dream you half remember. It is not anger that lingers here. It is longing. The house seems to want witnesses, people to listen to the story it keeps rewriting. When night falls, the oaks outside stretch their limbs across the roof, their shadows crawling over the white columns. The cicadas fade and the air grows still. Inside, the clock ticks twice, and the smell of oleander drifts through the hallway. Somewhere upstairs, a pen scratches faintly against paper. But when you enter the room, nothing is there, only a diary left open on the desk. Its last line written in a delicate hand that reads, "I'm still here." The myrtle's plantation breathes like a living thing. It listens, it remembers, and every now and then, it writes. Downtown Chattanooga moves with the slow rhythm of the South. Streetlights glow against brick facades, and the Tennessee River glimmers under the bridge. Among the city's oldest buildings stands a grand hotel of red brick and white trim. Its doors revolve softly, its lobby smells of polished wood and old bourbon. This is the Reed House Hotel, a place that wears its history like perfume. Guests come for luxury, but many leave with a story they cannot quite explain. The hotel first opened in 1872, a symbol of progress rising from the ashes of war. It was rebuilt and expanded through the roaring 20s, hosting railroad tycoons, actors, and politicians passing through the valley. Chandeliers shimmered above the marble floors, and jazz drifted from the ballroom long into the night. But one night in April 1927, the music stopped. A woman named Annalisa Netherly checked into room 311. She was young, beautiful, and traveling alone. Hotel staff recalled a man visiting her that evening, sharply dressed, carrying a leather briefcase. They argued in the lobby, voices low but tense, before disappearing upstairs. Around midnight, guests heard shouting, followed by a sound like glass shattering. Then silence. The next morning, the maid unlocked the door for cleaning and stepped into a room suspended in time. The bathtub was filled to the brim, the water dark and motionless. The mirror was cracked from corner to corner. A crimson stain ran down the porcelain. Annalisa lay still, her eyes open, her expression almost calm, as though she had been waiting for someone to find her. The man was gone. He checked in under a false name and fled before dawn, leaving behind only the scent of tobacco and the echo of what had happened. The police came. Questions were asked, but no answers stayed. The death was ruled a homicide, yet the case was never solved. For decades, room 311 remained sealed. Workers who entered to renovate said their tools went missing. The door slammed behind them, and the faint sound of running water came from the empty bathroom. One electrician claimed he saw a woman's reflection in the mirror, even though he was alone. When he turned, the room was empty. Guests who later stayed there described cold drafts, laughter in the hallway, and the scent of rose perfume that appeared only around 3 in the morning. Today, room 311 has been restored to its 1920s appearance: clawfoot tub, velvet drapes, mahogany furniture. The hotel rents it to the curious, but only the brave stay the night. Some hear footsteps pacing between the bed and the bathroom. Others report hearing a whisper through the vent, a woman's voice asking, "Why did you leave?" Staff members have seen lights flicker, as if reacting to unseen motion. One guest who tried to photograph the room at night found that every image came out blurred, streaked with faint shapes like ripples in water. Historians debate whether the story of Annalisa is fact or legend. Records confirm that a young woman was found dead there, but the details shift with every retelling. Perhaps it is the uncertainty that keeps her near, the unfinished conversation, the unspoken goodbye. Some believe she lingers not out of anger, but out of habit, replaying the last moments of her life over and over, unwilling to step beyond the door. If you ever visit the Reed House, the staff will tell you the ghost is gentle. She doesn't harm, only observes. Yet those who have stayed in 311 know better. They say the room feels heavy, as if time itself refuses to move. Watches stop. Phones lose signal. The air thickens with perfume and regret. At 3:15, the water in the tub ripples, though no tap runs, and for a few seconds, the reflection in the mirror is not your own. When morning comes, the light through the curtains looks unchanged, and the clock on the wall still reads the same time, 3:27 a.m. The maid knocks softly and says the same words she's said for nearly a century. Housekeeping. Inside, the air smells faintly of roses, sighs. And somewhere, deep in the silence of room 311, a woman breathes once more. On the outskirts of the Scottish town of Dumbarton stands an elegant stone bridge, arching gracefully over a narrow ravine. Moss covers its balustrades, and the air smells of rain, pine, and river mist. It looks like any old countryside crossing a piece of Victorian beauty built in 1895. But if you ask the locals, they will tell you it is no ordinary bridge. They call it Overtown, and they say it whispers to the living, especially to those with 4 legs. For more than 70 years, dogs have leapt from this bridge to their deaths. Always from the same side. Always between the same 2 parapets. Over 50 animals lost, some say hundreds, all jumping without hesitation, as if summoned by something only they could sense. The phenomenon has been called the Dog Suicide Bridge, a name spoken quietly by those who have stood there and heard the wind shift. The first cases appeared in the 1950s. Well-trained dogs, mid-walk, suddenly broke free from their leashes, sprinted to the edge, and leapt over the stone railings into the rocks below. The drop is 40 feet. Most did not survive. Their owners stood frozen, unable to understand. Some swore they heard a faint humming before it happened. Others said the air felt charged like a storm about to break. And those who returned to the bridge afterward reported their new dogs pulling toward the same spot, tails wagging as if drawn by invisible hands. Scientists have searched for explanations. Theories range from the scent of mink nesting in the undergrowth to the high-frequency sound of rushing water echoing through the stone arches. Behavioral experts call it sensory overload, a perfect storm of smell, sound, and instinct. But locals insist there is more to it. They speak of Overtoun House, a gray mansion standing at the far end of the bridge, once home to the aristocratic White family. The lord of the house lost his wife there in 1908. He claimed her spirit lingered on the grounds, and he was often seen wandering the bridge calling her name. Since then, strange coincidences have shadowed the place. In the 1990s, a man threw his infant child from the bridge, believing the boy possessed by the devil. When questioned later, he said a voice told him to do it. The tragedy echoed the legend something on the bridge calls, and some who hear it cannot resist. Visitors describe an overwhelming stillness. Birds do not sing here. The sound of the nearby waterfall seems to vanish when you step onto the midpoint. The air feels dense, humming softly, and every whisper bounces back a second too late, as if the bridge itself is speaking under its breath. Dogs pause, ears perked, then lean forward over the edge, as though recognizing something below. Some owners feel the pull too, a strange, weightless urge to look down, to step closer, to see what the dogs see. At dusk, the stone glows faintly green with moss. The river below looks black, its surface unbroken. From a distance, the bridge seems peaceful, almost sacred. But those who linger too long notice that the wind always moves toward the center, no matter its direction. Locals say it is the breath of the lost, returning to the world. They tell stories of a woman in white, seen wandering the parapet, her form translucent against the fog. She never speaks, but her presence is enough to make even the bravest travelers quicken their pace. If you visit Overtoun, bring respect and silence. Keep your dog close, your eyes forward, your thoughts steady. Do not lean over the railing, no matter how harmless it seems, because those who do say the view is hypnotic. The green forest, the dark water, the way the light bends and twists below. It feels like the earth itself is calling your name. And once you hear it, it's hard to walk away. At night, when mist rises from the gorge, the bridge seems to vanish. Locals say that's when it's safe, when the spirits sleep. But at dawn, when the first beam of sunlight hits the stone, the air hums again, soft and low, like a sigh beneath the wind. Maybe it's just the river, or maybe it's something else, waiting patiently for the next traveler to stop. Look down and listen to the bridge that calls you back. Hollywood was built on light, bright, burning light that drew dreamers from across the world, all chasing the same golden promise. But every light casts a shadow, and sometimes that shadow takes shape. At the corner of Hollywood and Vine stands a palace of sound and illusion, a monument to a time when movies were miracles. The Pantages Theater. Its doors first opened in 1930, its chandeliers glittering like captured stars. But those who work there say the theater never really closes. When the crowds leave, something else remains. The Pantages was the crown jewel of Alexander Pantages, a Greek immigrant who built an empire of theaters across America. The Hollywood branch was his masterpiece, a marble lobby, gold leaf ceilings, and a stage fit for the divine. But as quickly as fame arrived, it vanished. Pantages fell from grace amid scandal and lawsuits. By the time he died, his beloved theater had been sold to Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire, whose paranoia filled every room he entered. Some say Hughes never left. During the 1940s and 50s, ushers reported hearing footsteps echoing across the balcony, long after the last audience had gone. Projectionists spoke of the sound booth door locking itself, and the faint hum of machinery running on its own. Stagehands found spotlights, turning toward empty seats, as though seeking faces that weren't there. One janitor swore he saw a man in a gray suit, pacing the mezzanine, hands behind his back, whispering about camera angles. When he described the figure, it matched Howard Hughes perfectly, tall, gaunt, and restless. In the 1960s, a singer rehearsing alone stopped mid-song, when the grand piano in the orchestra pit struck a note by itself. The key depressed slowly, as if pressed by an invisible hand. Later, sound engineers tested the instrument and found nothing wrong. The same night, a projection light flickered on in the empty booth, casting a beam across the vacant stage. There was no operator inside. Employees tell stories quietly, between shifts. One usher says she once entered the balcony at closing and heard applause, soft, polite, rhythmic, coming from the darkened seats. When she turned on her flashlight, the sound stopped. Dust floated in the beam like golden snow. She swears she felt a tap on her shoulder, but when she turned, No one was there. Another worker claims to have seen a man in the wings wearing a tuxedo from the 1930s. He nodded once, stepped back into the curtain, and vanished. Even visitors who know nothing of the legends sense something unusual. They describe a sudden hush when stepping through the lobby doors, as if the air itself is listening. The walls seem to hum faintly, with the vibrations of thousands of forgotten performances, he says. Some say the ghosts of the Pantages are not trapped. They are simply addicted. The stage was their heartbeat, the applause their breath, and even death could not convince them to stop performing. The theater has survived earthquakes, financial crises, and the slow fate of the movie palaces that once defined Los Angeles. Yet the Pantages endures, beautiful and defiant. At night, when the last lights dim, the velvet curtains sway, though the air is still. The chandelier flickers like a heartbeat. Somewhere above, in the projection booth, a reel begins to turn, slowly, quietly, though no one touches it. A beam of light cuts across the stage, illuminating empty space. Dust motes rise and dance like ghosts rehearsing one last number. If you stand in the back row and close your eyes, you might hear it, the murmur of an audience waiting for a show that never ends. A cough, a sigh, the rustle of evening gowns. Then a single spotlight glows center stage, and for a moment, the old Hollywood magic returns. But when you open your eyes, the seats are empty, and the applause you hear is only the echo of time, refusing to fade. The Ponticus Theater doesn't haunt, it performs. Every night. Forever. And as long as someone steps inside and listens, the show will go on. Just outside Krakow, Poland, beneath rolling green fields and quiet villages, lies a kingdom carved from salt. For 7 centuries, men descended into its depths, chipping away at the earth to harvest what was once called white gold. The Wieliczka salt mine stretches for more than 100 miles underground, a labyrinth of tunnels, chambers, and chapels carved entirely from rock salt. Tourists walk its polished corridors now, marveling at chandeliers that glimmer like crystal. But there are parts of the mine no guide will show you. Places where the air grows too thick and where voices echo from walls that should not speak. Work began here in the 13th century. Generations of miners lived and died in the tunnels, their sweat and breath absorbed into the salt. The mine became a city beneath the earth, with stables for horses, workshops, even chapels where men prayed before their shifts. The miners called it the underground cathedral. But faith did not always keep them safe. Cave-ins, floods, and collapses were frequent. When a section gave way, it buried everything: tools, lamps, men swallowed whole by the dark. Stories say the mine keeps what it takes. During the 15th century, a collapse sealed 12 miners behind a wall of rock. Rescue attempts failed. And when the tunnels were finally reopened decades later, their bodies had turned to salt statues, hands raised, faces preserved mid-prayer. The sight terrified those who found them. The chamber was sealed again and renamed the Hall of the Silent Ones. Workers who pass near it today claim they hear faint tapping on the walls, like someone still digging, still waiting to be found. As centuries passed, the mine grew deeper. Entire generations spent their lives beneath the surface, rarely seeing sunlight. The men developed pale skin, strange coughs, and eyes accustomed to eternal twilight. They spoke of shadows moving independently of their lamps and of whispers that followed them through the corridors. When a miner died underground, his comrades would carve a small figure of him from salt and leave it in a hidden alcove, believing the mine would remember his soul. Over time, those effigies multiplied, hundreds of silent guardians staring from the walls. During the Second World War, the Germans occupied Wieliczka, turning parts of it into a weapons factory. Many prisoners sent to work there vanished without record. After the war, workers discovered sealed tunnels marked with foreign symbols. Inside, the air was untouched, heavy with the scent of rust and brine. The lights flickered and tools corroded within hours. Nothing grew, nothing decayed, as if time itself refused to enter. Today, most of the upper levels are open to tourists, filled with sculptures, statues of saints, and glittering altars carved from pure salt. But guides warn never to wander from the marked paths. The air can shift suddenly, they say, and it is easy to lose direction. Some visitors claim to have heard footsteps behind them, though they are the last in line. Others describe a distant cough echoing through empty chambers. One group reported seeing a man in a miner's uniform, watching from the shadows. When they approached, the figure stepped backward into the wall and disappeared. Scientists explain the sounds as natural acoustics, the coughs as dripping water, the shapes as tricks of light, reflecting from salt crystals. Yet there is something unsettling about the atmosphere. The deeper you go, the more you feel the weight above, the entire world pressing down. The air grows cold and damp, and your breath fogs even in the stillness. Every step echoes for a second too long, as if someone else is walking in rhythm beside you. At the lowest depths, the tunnels narrow to nothing. The walls shimmer faintly, wet with centuries of condensation. Here, miners once said the salt breathes. Stand still and listen closely. You can hear a faint inhaling sound, like the earth drawing air through its lungs. The deeper chambers have never been fully mapped. Some say there are doors carved into the salt that lead nowhere, sealed from the inside. Others believe the mine is still expanding, eating away at itself, one silent collapse at a time. When the lights flicker, the air hums softly, and for a moment it feels as if the mine itself is alive, hungry, patient, and aware. You turn back toward the elevator, your footsteps echoing in the dark. Somewhere behind you, the tapping starts again, faint but steady. The mind remembers every sound it has ever heard, every man it has ever taken. And if you listen long enough, you might realize it isn't the mind that's echoing, it's the ones still trying to find their way out. An hour southwest of Berlin, hidden among the pine forests of Brandenburg, lies a city of silence. Dozens of red brick buildings stretch across 500 acres, their windows broken, their corridors filled with dust and echoes. The locals call it Belitz Heilstätten, a name that once meant hope, and now means something else entirely. It is a hospital frozen in time, a monument to both healing and decay. Built in 1890, Belitz Heilstätten was one of the most advanced medical complexes in Europe. Designed to treat tuberculosis patients, it housed over 60 buildings, connected by underground tunnels and open-air courtyards, where the sick were encouraged to breathe in the fresh forest air. Sunlight and architecture were meant to cure. For a while, it worked. Thousands recovered. The halls rang with voices, and the smell of pine mixed with antiseptic and optimism. But soon, history arrived. When the First World War broke out, Belitz became a military hospital. Trains of wounded soldiers rolled through daily. Among them, in 1916, was a young corporal named Adolf Hitler, treated here for leg injuries after the Battle of the Somme. His presence remains a grim footnote, a ghost of history rather than spirit. After the war, the hospital returned to civilian care until war came again. During World War II, Belitz once more filled with the wounded. Bombs shook the walls, but never destroyed them. After Germany's defeat, the Soviet army took control, transforming it into a secret military hospital. For nearly 50 years, it was closed to the public, a forbidden forest of red brick where no one knew what was happening inside. Even high-ranking East Germans whispered about experiments. long-term wards where the patients never left. When the Soviets finally abandoned it in the 1990s, they left everything behind. Beds, wheelchairs, X-ray machines, all still in place, slowly gathering dust. Photographers who sneak into Belitz today describe a beauty that feels wrong. The sunlight falls through shattered skylights, painting the tiles in gold and green. Vines crawl across the walls of the surgical wing. In one room, a grand piano stands beneath a collapsed ceiling, its keys half rotted, but still in mossies. When the wind blows, they move on their own, playing a tune without melody. It sounds like breathing, some say. Others call it the hospital remembering. There are darker stories, too. A nurse who vanished in 2008. Tourists who entered the surgical building and heard the sound of footsteps above them, though the floor had caved in years earlier. Paranormal teams have recorded what-in temperature drops, whispers in Russian and German, overlapping in the static. One investigator claimed to see a figure in a long coat, standing at the end of a corridor.
Their resilience is a reminder that true strength does not lie in physical power, but in the ability to maintain our dignity and humanity in the face of overwhelming adversity. These men showed us that resistance is not just about fighting against external forces. It's about resisting the narrative others try to impose on us and refusing to accept oppression as a fact of life. They proved that no matter how deep the hatred or how widespread the injustice, knowledge, self-respect, and honor can be the ultimate weapons in the battle for freedom and equality. But their story also reveals a painful truth that still echoes today. Even the greatest acts of heroism can go unrecognized. These black POWs changed the course of history, but for too long, their contributions have been overlooked and their sacrifices forgotten. This is not just a tragedy for them, but for us all, because by ignoring their story, we deny ourselves the chance to fully understand the depth of the human spirit and the power of resistance. We must ensure that the legacy of these men is never forgotten and that we continue to honor their courage by standing up for justice, equality, and dignity in our own time. Their legacy is a powerful call to action. It calls on us to resist injustice wherever we encounter it, to fight for the rights of all people, and to never back down in the face of oppression. It is a reminder that our strength lies not just in our ability to endure, but in our willingness to stand up for what is right, even when the odds are against us. The Black American POWs of World War II showed us that change is possible, but only if we are willing to fight for it with knowledge, dignity, and a commitment to justice. We are the inheritors of their legacy, and it is up to us to carry their fight forward. The battle for equality is far from over, and their story remains as relevant today as it was when it was first written. As we continue the fight for justice, let us be inspired by their example to resist oppression, to stand for what is right, and to always remember that the fight for dignity and equality is not just a historical battle, but an ongoing one that each of us must take part in. Let us honor their sacrifices by ensuring that their story is never forgotten and that we continue to push forward for a better, more just world. The story of the Black American prisoners of war during World War II is more than just a historical account. It is a profound testament to the strength of the human spirit, the power of knowledge, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. These men faced unimaginable brutality and hardship, yet they not only survived, but thrived in the face of adversity. Their resilience and courage serve as a powerful reminder that our true strength comes not from external circumstances, but from our ability to hold on to our dignity and humanity, even when the world around us seeks to strip it away.
He hung them everywhere, from trees, fences, and even the walls of his hut. Over the years, the island transformed into a graveyard of dolls. Headless, eyeless, burned, torn, all watching with their hollow gaze. Don Julian said they protected him. Others thought they watched him instead. Neighbors occasionally visited, bringing him broken dolls to add to his collection. They said he spoke to them as if they were alive, calling them by names only he knew. Sometimes he whispered to the water before hanging a new one, as though asking permission. Tourists began to arrive, curious and nervous. They left offerings, coins, ribbons, toys to keep the spirit of the girl calm. The air grew heavy with superstition, with the smell of decay and candle wax. And through it all, Don Julian continued his vigil. In 2001, after nearly 50 years on the island, Don Julian was found dead, floating face down in the same canal where he once discovered the little girl. His nephew, who found him, said it was as if the island had finally taken him. The dolls, he swore, seemed to sway in unison that day, though there was no wind. Since then, locals have claimed to hear voices at dusk, two now instead of one. The girl and the man, forever tied to the island of the forgotten. Those who visit today describe an unease that settles deep in the stomach. The dolls seem to follow you with their eyes. The air hums faintly, like the sound of bees. Sometimes, the canal water ripples without reason. Guides warn visitors not to mock the dolls or take photos without asking permission. They are listening, they say. And when night falls, even the bravest travelers hurry back to their boats, unwilling to see what happens after dark. At sunrise, the light filters through the trees, illuminating hundreds of faces, some smiling, some broken, all straying. The island feels suspended between two worlds, a shrine built from grief and obsession. Each doll tells a story, each thread and crack a memory of hands that tried to make peace with death. People come searching for horror, but often leave with sadness instead, realizing the dolls are not cursed. They are witnesses, silent guardians of a promise that was never fulfilled. If you ever drift through the canals of Xochimilco and hear a splash behind you, do not turn back. Offer a quiet prayer instead. Because the island of dolls is not a place of evil, it is a place of memory. And memory, like water, never lets go. In the heart of Philadelphia, behind gray stone walls that rise like a fortress, stands a ruin built on silence. The Eastern State Penitentiary opened its gates in 1829 as the most modern prison in the world. Its architects called it a place of reform, not punishment. Every cell was designed for solitude, every corridor for reflection. But what began as an experiment in moral enlightenment soon became something else, a cathedral of confinement, where the walls themselves seemed to stare back. Eastern State was revolutionary. The Paiute never returned to that place. They had won a war, but lost the right to tell the story aloud. Only in the quiet before dawn, when the fire burned low, did the old ones sometimes hum a tune that carried the rhythm of slow footsteps fading into ash. Far to the east, where the plains stretch beyond sight, and the grass moves like wufas on an unseonit, the Comanche tell a story of a time before memory. It was Chief Rolling Thunder who first spoke it to the pale men, who came with notebooks and questions. They sat around his fire, while the night went calm through the prairie. Sparks drifted upward, vanishing into stars. He said that long ago, before any tribe rode horses or carried iron, there was a race of white giants who ruled the plains. They built walls on the mountain tops and cities that shone when the sun rose, towers so tall they touched the low clouds. Their voices rolled across the valleys like storms, and their hands shaped stone as easily as clay. Rolling Thunder's eyes gleamed in the firelight. He said the giants were proud and strong, but pride grows heavier than hunger. They took land that was not theirs and forced the smaller tribes into labor. They dug deep for the red metal that bled from the earth and used it to forge ornaments and weapons. The plains trembled with their power. Yet even among the giants, there were whispers of fear. The Great Spirit watched them, waiting for the day when mercy would die in their hearts. When that day came, the wind changed. It began with a season of fire. Storms swept across the sky without rain. The earth cracked open, swallowing the towers they had built. Rolling thunder said his ancestors saw the giants running across the horizon, their cries echoing like thunder, their faces pale with disbelief. Some tried to flee east toward the rising sun, but the spirit struck them down. The others vanished into the caves of the west, hiding from judgment. When silence returned, only their ruins remained, mounds of earth that the wind has worn smooth. The old chief's voice softened. He said his people did not rejoice in the fall of the giants, for they had learned from them both greatness and arrogance. Compared to them, he murmured, the white men of today are but children. The men who recorded his words smiled politely, thinking them myth. But when the fire burned low, one of them asked if any of the giants survived. Rolling Thunder pointed toward the dark hills and said, "They do not die easily. The earth forgets their names, but not their footsteps." The night grew quiet after that. Coyotes called from far off, their cries rising and falling with the wind. The men packed their notebooks, but the old chief stayed by the fire, staring into the coals. He saw shapes in them, faces too large for the flames, eyes that glimmered with something between sorrow and rage. When the last ember dimmed, he whispered a prayer for balance, that pride never again would grow taller than mercy. Tourists wander through the same halls once meant for reflection, their footsteps echoing off cracked plaster and rusted bars. Some claim to feel pressure in their chests, as if the building itself is breathing in sync with them. And perhaps it is. Perhaps after nearly 2 centuries of watching, listening, and remembering, the prison has learned what its creators never understood, that solitude does not purify the soul. It devours it. At dusk, the tour guides lock the gates and step outside, leaving the corridors empty once more. Inside, the air settles, the wind hums through the broken skylights. Somewhere deep within the cell block, a door creaks open, then shuts again. No one is there to see it. The lights fade and the walls exhale. Eastern State Penitentiary returns to its purpose, watching, waiting, listening. Because here, silence is never empty. It is alive. In the mountains of western Massachusetts lies a tunnel that was never meant to be quiet. Nearly 5 miles long, carved through solid rock, it was a triumph of 19th century engineering, a passage that connected towns, commerce, and ambition. But somewhere along the way, the Hoosick Tunnel earned another name. Locals call it the Bloody Pit. More than 200 men died building it, and they say the mountains never forgot. Construction began in 1851. The dream was simple: bore through Hoosick Mountain and unite the rail lines that would bring life to the small towns of the Berkshires. But the mountain fought back. Explosions misfired, machinery collapsed, and the rock itself seemed alive, groaning and shifting as if resisting the men who cut into its heart. The deaths began almost immediately. Cave-ins, suffocation, floods of gas. The newspapers called it cursed. By 1867, tragedy struck its deepest point. A crew of miners was working nearly 1,000 feet underground when a shaft filled with explosive fumes. A spark ignited, triggering a blast that collapsed the tunnel and sent a column of flame shooting up through the ventilation shaft. 13 men were trapped below. Rescuers lowered ropes and lanterns, but the air turned toxic. Weeks later, when they finally broke through, they found the bodies floating in a pool of water, their faces untouched by decay. The lamps in their hands were still burning. After that, Workers swore the tunnel was haunted. They heard voice calling from the darkness, and the steady rhythm of picks striking stone long after the shifts had ended. At night, the forest around the tunnel filled with a low humming, as if the earth itself was grieving. One foreman quit after seeing a pale figure in a torn miner's coat standing by the entrance. The apparition raised its arm as if to warn him, then vanished. The work continued anyway. Years passed. Dynamite replaced black powder. Steam drills replaced hammers, and the tunnel slowly took shape. But the deaths never stopped. Another explosion killed dozens in 1873, and yet the railroad demanded progress. When it finally opened in 1875, the first train passed through at dawn. The engineer reported that, halfway inside, all sound vanished. The clatter of wheels, the hiss of steam gone. Only silence, heavy and absolute, until the light returned at the far end. Modern visitors describe the same thing. Stand at the mouth of the Hoosac Tunnel, and the air feels different, colder. The sound of your voice falls flat, swallowed by the stone. Even the wind seems hesitant to enter. Locals say the tunnel eats noise because it is still hungry. Those who venture inside alone talk about hearing faint whispers just beyond the range of hearing, counting, calling, working. Some bring recording equipment. The microphones capture nothing but static, though the operators swear they heard footsteps beside them. Engineers explain it as acoustics. The curved walls and thick granite absorb vibration. But the old railway workers know better. They say the tunnel breathes. You can feel it when the train passes, a pulse that moves through the air like a heartbeat. Every breath the mountain takes pulls in the sound and keeps it. In 1973, a maintenance crew exploring an unused service alcove discovered something unnerving. Embedded in the stone was a set of handprints, perfect human, pressed deep into the granite, as though the rock had softened for a moment, and recorded the last struggle of someone reaching for the light. Today, the Hoosac Tunnel still carries trains, though fewer each year. The locals avoid it after sunset. On still nights, when fog gathers around the entrance, the silence becomes so complete it presses against your eardrums. No NC6, no wind, no birds. Just the pulse of the earth and the memory of 200 men who never left. If you ever find yourself there, stand quietly and listen. You'll hear nothing at all until you do. A faint tapping from the dark, a single breath behind you, a voice calling your name. Then, before you can answer, the sound is gone, swallowed whole by the mountain that eats noise, light, and men alike. The Hoosac Tunnel does not echo. It remembers. And once it hears you, it never forgets. In the heart of San Jose stands a mansion that was never finished because it was never meant to be. 4 stories high, sprawling across nearly 200 rooms, it twists and turns like a labyrinth, built by dreams or by guilt. Staircases rise into ceilings. Doors open into walls. Windows look onto other windows. It is a house designed to confuse, to mislead, to trap. They call it the Winchester Mystery House. And for more than a century, it has been whispering to those who enter. Keep building. Never stop. The story begins with Sarah Winchester, widow of William Wirt Winchester, heir to the fortune built by the Winchester rifle, the gun that won the West. After her husband and infant daughter died within a few years of each other, Sarah withdrew from society, consumed by grief and rumor. Some said she believed she was accursed by the spirits of those killed by her family's invention. Others said she heard their voices cease. Seeking guidance, she consulted a Boston medium who told her the spirits demanded repentance, and that the only way to appease them was to build a home that would never be completed. So she built. In 1884, Sarah moved to California and purchased an unfinished farmhouse on the edge of an orchard. Construction began immediately and never stopped. Carpenters worked around the clock, every day, every year, for nearly 4 decades. There were no blueprints, no master plan. New rooms appeared overnight. Stairways ended abruptly. Hallways looped back into themselves. Some doors opened into thin air, 3 stories above the ground. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air like a heartbeat. The mansion grew, not by logic, but by command. Visitors described Sarah as polite but distant, wandering the halls with a lantern, scribbling notes for the workers. She believed the house itself was alive, that the spirits dictated its design through whispers and dreams. She slept in a different bedroom each night, to convince them, believing that if they could not find her, they would not harm her. Seances were held at midnight in a hidden room known only to her. Neighbors claimed to hear organ music drifting through the night, though no one ever saw her play. Over time, the mansion became a monument to obsession. It contained staircases that climbed 7 steps up and 11 steps down, leading nowhere. Doors that opened to drops as if daring the curious to fall. Cabinets only an inch deep. Windows installed in the floor. Everything designed to disorient. Some say it was madness. Others say it was strategy, a maze to distract the dead. When Sarah Winchester died in 1922, the hammering stopped. Workers downed their tools and left the property exactly as it was, half-built, half-abandoned, echoing with unfinished purpose. Within the hours, the legend began. Locals said the house groaned that night, its timbers shifting like lungs releasing a final breath. Earthquakes shook the structure in the years that followed, but it never collapsed. Instead, it adapted, twisting its corridors further out of logic's reach. Today, the Winchester Mystery House stands as both museum and maze. Tour guides lead visitors through its endless turns, 160 rooms, 47 fireplaces, 2,000 doors, and 10,000 windows. Some feel nothing. Others report dizziness, nausea, or the sense of being followed. Cameras malfunction without reason. Visitors whisper about cold spots in warm air, or the faint smell of gunpowder. One caretaker claims to hear footsteps pacing above him when the upper floors are empty. Another once found a chair moved overnight, turned to face a wall that was never there before. Architects have studied the house for decades, trying to decode its design. There is symmetry where there should be chaos, patterns hidden within nonsense. Some rooms are perfectly balanced for sound. One whisper travels through walls, while a shout disappears. Engineers call it acoustics. Paranormalists call it communication. At dusk, sunlight filters through stained glass, scattering colors across the hall, like confetti from another world. The house hums softly in the wind, its windows trembling like eyelids trying to wake. And if you listen long enough, you can almost hear it. The echo of hammers, faint but rhythmic, still building somewhere deep inside. Sarah Winchester once said she would build until the day she died, and in a way, she never stopped. The house continues to change. Floors shift. Doors realign. The mansion breathes. Perhaps it is not haunted by the dead, but by the idea that something unfinished can never rest. So if you walk its hallways and find yourself lost, do not panic. The house wants it that way. Every step you take is one it remembers, another piece added to its endless design. Because the Winchester Mystery House was never built for the living. It was built for those still searching for a way out. At the foot of Mount Fuji, where the air grows still and the soil is born from ancient fire, lies a sea of trees so dense that the wind forgets how to move off. Aokigahara. To most, it is simply the forest. To others, it is something deeper place where sound dissolves, where compasses spin without reason, where people come to disappear. The name means the sea of trees, and from above it looks exactly like that. An ocean of green waves frozen in time. The ground is jagged, uneven, filled with hidden caves and roots that twist like veins. The forest floor muffles every footstep. Even birds rarely cry here. Locals say that once you step inside, the world outside fades. The air thickens, the temperature drops, and your sense of direction begins to slip away. Scientists explain that the magnetic rock beneath the surface interferes with compasses. That's why the needles turn, why maps fail. But the villagers who live on the edge of Aokigahara tell another story. They say the forest shifts for reasons no instrument can measure. Paths rearrange themselves. Trees lean to block your way. Landmarks vanish, replaced by others that look the same. It's not the magnetism that traps you. They say it's the forest remembering who comes and who doesn't leave. Centuries ago, during times of famine, there was a cruel tradition called ubasoesutusust, the abandonment of the elderly in remote mountains when food ran scarce. Legends claim that some were left in Aokigahara, their spirits wandering still, whispering to those who enter. Hikers report hearing voices calling their names or footsteps following in perfect rhythm behind them. When they turn, there is nothing but stillness and the faint scent of damp moss. Even today, rescue volunteers mark their paths with bright plastic tape to avoid getting lost. Some of those ribbons stretch deep into the trees where sunlight never reaches. Many of them end abruptly. People tie them to find their way back, but not all do. On quiet mornings, the tape flutters in the wind like prayer flags, shimmering among the trunks. A reminder of all who vanished, searching for something they could not name. Visitors describe an overwhelming calm when they first enter. The air feels heavy, the silence comforting, like being underwater. But the longer you walk, the more that calm turns into pressure. The sound of your own breathing becomes too loud. The forest seems to listen, and when it does, the compass in your hand begins to tremble. Some say Aokigahara is not cursed, only misunderstood. It is a place of reflection, where the boundary between life and death grows thin. Locals speak of strange lights that drift between the trees, blue orbs that hover just out of reach. They call them Hadodui, wandering souls. Scientists call them gases from the volcanic soil, igniting briefly in the air. But no photograph has ever captured them clearly, and those who chase the lights never find where they end. One park ranger, who has worked the forest for decades, once said, "It's not an evil place, it's a mirror. Whatever you bring into it, that's what you'll find." He carries bells on his backpack to keep the silence away. Others leave offerings, coins, paper cranes, small bottles of saketo, honor the forest's unseen residents. When the wind does pass through, it carries a sound like distant singing, soft and wordless. At dusk, the trees turn black against the fading light of Mount Fuji. The forest becomes a living shadow. If you look down, you'll see the compass needle twitch, turning slowly away from north, as though pointing toward something else, something that moves. The deeper you go, the less the world seems real. Time stretches, distance falls, and then, somewhere between two breaths, you realize you've stopped walking, though you never meant to. Those who have returned say that the forest lets you leave only when it wants to. Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes days. No one ever feels the moment they cross back into the world. It happens quietly, as if the forest exhales and releases you. But those who never come out remain part of it, their footsteps added to the rhythm of roots and stone. Aokigahara is a place of stillness, but not of death. It listens, it shifts, it keeps secrets. And if you ever find yourself there, remember, follow the tape, watch the light, and never trust the compass. Because in the sea of trees, direction is not something you find, it's something you lose. In a small Czech village called Lukova, surrounded by quiet hills and fields of wheat, stands a church that refuses to die. Its roof is cracked, its plaster crumbling, its pews blanketed in dust. The villagers stopped praying here long ago. But if you step inside today, you will not find an empty ruin. You will find figures, more than 30 of them, sitting silently in the pews, their bodies covered in white shrouds, their heads bowed as though waiting for a sermon that will never come. This is St. George's Church, and they say it rings its own bells. The church was built in 1352, dedicated to St. George, the dragon slayer. For centuries it served as the heart of Lukova, a place of weddings, funerals, and harvest blessings. But in 1968, during a funeral service, the ceiling suddenly collapsed. No one was killed, but the villagers took it as a sign bad omen. They stopped coming. The doors were locked. The candles went out, and the building began its long descent into silence. Years passed. Rain fell through the broken roof. Wind carried dust across the altar. The church became a shell, a skeleton of its former self. Until one day, decades later, a young art student named Jakub Hadrava arrived. He wanted to save it not through repair, but through remembrance. He molded figures from plaster and cloth, draping them in white, placing them carefully in the pews and aisles. He called them ghosts. But to the villagers, they were more than that. They were the congregation returned. When visitors first entered, they said the temperature dropped. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and stone. The figures sat motionless, their faces featureless, but somehow expressive. Light from the stained glass fell across their forms, making them shimmer like spirits half caught between worlds. And when the wind passed through the broken tower, the old bell above began to swing on its own, releasing a soft, uneven chime. That was when people began to whisper that the church had come back to life. Some say the figures move. A hand shifts, a head turns. They appear closer to the door in the morning than they were the night before. No camera has ever captured it happening, but the evidence accumulates: chairs scraped across the floor, candle wax pooling in strange shapes, footprints in the dust where no one has walked. Skeptics call it drafts and imagination. The faithful say it's the parish returning for service, unwilling to let their home disappear. At night, when the moonlight filters through the tower, the church becomes something more than architecture. It becomes memory made visible. The shrouded figures glow faintly, pale against the dark walls. The wind hums through the organ pipes, producing low, mournful tones like breathing. Travelers who have spent the night inside speak of a strange comfort, as if surrounded by company rather than ghosts. They are not frightening, one said. They are waiting. Locals have learned to live alongside the legend. They reopen the church each year for a special service in honor of the dead. Bells ring without touch. The floor trembles slightly, as if the building itself sighs with relief. Some claim to feel hands brushing against theirs during prayer, cold, gentle, insistent. Others hear faint singing in Latin from nowhere and everywhere at once. To outsiders, the spectacle is haunting art, an installation that saved the building from collapse. But to Lukova's people, it is something sacred. The ghosts keep the church alive. Tourists bring donations. The roof no longer leaks. The walls still crumble, but slowly, as if the decay itself hesitates. The artist's work has turned ruin into resurrection. At dusk, when the last visitors leave, the church door creaks shut on its own. The light fades, and the figures remain seated, motionless in the pews. Somewhere above, the bell sways once, a soft metallic breath that echoes across the valley. No one is there to pull the rope. Yet the sound rings true, steady, patient, eternal. St. George's Church does not mourn the dead. It keeps them company. It waits for the living to listen. And when the wind moves through the tower again, the bell will ring, not for fear, but for remembrance. In the quiet hills of western Pennsylvania, where the forests grow thick and the towns fade into farmland, there's a stretch of pavement that locals avoid after dark. It's just a mile long, a narrow, cracked road winding through the woods between Ohioville and Industry. Nothing remarkable marks its beginning or end. But they say once you drive it, you'll never remember the whole trip. It's called Kelly Road, and those who know it call it cursed. The legend began decades ago. Farmers noticed their animals acting strange near the tree line, docile cows turning wild, dogs snarling at empty air, chickens refusing to cross the gravel path that led toward Kelly. Hunters reported losing their bearings, walking in circles, though their compasses pointed straight. Then came the stories about people. Drivers who entered the road at dusk and emerged minutes later pale and confused, unable to recall how they got through. Some said they saw figures in the fog. Others said they saw themselves. It's easy to dismiss as superstition. The area is old, the land unsettled, and the woods thick with fog that bends headlights and tricks the eye. But there is something about Kelly Road that resists explanation. Even in daylight, the air feels wrong, charged, heavy, almost magnetic. Birds fall silent when you stop your car. The trees on both sides lean inward, their branches forming a tunnel that blocks the sky. Step out, and you'll notice how sound dies here. Your footsteps seem too soft. Your voice doesn't carry. It's as if the road is listening. Locals tell the story of a family who lived near the road in the 1950s. One evening, their teenage son drove home from a friend's house and never arrived. The car was found parked at the edge of the woods, engine still running, headlights aimed into the trees. The driver's door was open, and the boy's footprints led about 10 feet into the forest, then stopped. Searchers found no struggle, no signs of an animal attack, just silence. His name was David Kelly, and some say the road took its name from him. Others insist it's older than that. There are other tales too. A couple driving late one night claimed to have seen a man standing in the middle of the road, waving for help. When they slowed down, his face blurred as if made of smoke, and then he vanished. Another driver reported losing 10 minutes of time, his watch frozen at 11:47, his dashboard clock at 11:57. Scientists blame electromagnetic interference from underground deposits of iron ore, but no study has ever proven it. Ghost hunters have tested the road with cameras and EMF meters. The readings cease, then drop to zero. Batteries drain instantly. One investigator described hearing faint whispers through the radio static, a woman's voice repeating a single phrase, "Don't stop." When he turned around, the road behind him was empty, but the forest seemed closer, the trees leaning in, as if closing a door. Even residents of nearby Ohioville speak of unease. Some claim the land was once a native burial site. Others connect it to abandoned coal mines beneath the hill. Whatever the truth, few dare to linger. Teenagers who go there for dares often return shaken, claiming their headlights flickered or their engines stalled. One girl said her phone filled with photographs she didn't take, blurry images of trees, all from angles that suggested she was lying on the ground. There's something else about Kelly Road that unnerves everyone who travels it. When you reach the midpoint, you feel watched, not by one thing, but by many. Some describe shapes moving between the trees, gray and formless. Others report sudden emotion, rage, grief, panic for no reason at all. Then, as quickly as it comes, it fades. You reach the end of the road, and it's like waking from a dream you can't remember. A few minutes gone, a feeling left behind. Rational minds will tell you there's nothing supernatural about Kelly Road. It's just fog geology suggestion. But locals know better. They say the road isn't haunted, it's hungry. It takes something from everyone who travels it. Sometimes it's a memory, sometimes a moment, sometimes just the sound of your own voice. If you ever find yourself driving through the forests of western Pennsylvania and you see the sign for Kelly Road, think twice before turning. Keep your windows up. Keep your eyes on the center line. And when you leave, check your clock. Because the road won't take your life. It'll take the part of you that remembers. In the heart of Pennsylvania, where rolling hills meet rusted coal seams, there once stood a town that time erased not with water or wind, but with fire. Centralia. For more than 60 years, the ground beneath it has burned slowly, invisibly, endlessly. What remains today is not a ghost town, but a scar that still breathes smoke. Centralia began like many small mining towns. Built on anthracite coal, it thrived through the early 1900s. The streets were lined with row houses, corner stores, and a single white church that rang its bells every Sunday. Children played on dirt roads. Men disappeared into the mines each morning and returned at dusk covered in soot. Life was hard, but it was steady until the fire came. In May of 1962, the town hired workers to clean up the local landfill, which had been built on the edge of an abandoned mine shaft. They set the trash ablaze, expecting it to burn out in a day. Instead, the flames slipped through a hidden crack and ignited the coal veins beneath the surface. The fire spread silently, moving through tunnels that ran for miles. At first, no one noticed. Then the earth began to change. The ground grew warm. Smoke seeped through the cracks in backyards and roads. Gas filled basements, thick and sulfurous. Residents woke to the smell of burning metal. By the 1970s, the fire had consumed so much of the coal that the ground began to collapse. One February morning in 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski fell into a sinkhole that opened suddenly in his backyard. The hole was 4 feet wide and 100 feet deep. The air inside over 300 degrees. He was pulled to safety. But the message was clear. Centralia was no longer safe to stand on. The government stepped in, offering buyouts to residents who agreed to leave. Some did. Others refused. They believed the danger was exaggerated, or perhaps they simply couldn't abandon their homes. For decades, officials argued while the fire spread. The population dwindled from thousands to a handful. Streets were torn up, houses demolished. But the fire kept burning, fed by endless coal seams. Even now, scientists estimate it could continue for another 200 years. What remains of Centralia today feels like the afterimage of a memory. Route 61, once the main road into town, now buckles and splits, its asphalt scarred by heat and graffiti. Steam rises through the cracks, curling into the cold air. Signs warn of toxic gas and unstable ground. The church still stands, its white steeple piercing the sky, but it rings for no one. Beneath it, the fire still moves, slow as breath, steady as heartbeats. People who visit describe a strange sensation. Say, the air feels alive, humming faintly, as if the town itself is still trying to speak. The temperature shifts unpredictably. A step to the left feels normal. A step to the right burns your shoes. At night, the horizon glows dull red, like embers beneath the skin of the earth. Locals call it the devil's breath. The few residents who remain say they no longer notice. The fire doesn't bother me, one old man told a reporter. It's the silence that does. Legends have grown from the ashes. Some claim to hear voices whispering through the vents of old mines. Others say shadowy figures walk the empty streets at dusk, visible only through the haze. Paranormal investigators bring equipment and leave with malfunctioning gear and footage of lights flickering in perfect rhythm, like a pulse. But the truth is tragedy enough. Centralia is a reminder that the world beneath our feet is never as stable as we believe. Fire is patient. It waits. It breathes. It consumes without hurry or mercy. And sometimes it wins. Today, the town's zip code no longer exists. Mail addressed to Centralia is returned to sender. The map marks it as blank. But the smoke still rises, curling into the sky like a warning no one can read. If you stand there long enough, you'll hear it. The faint hiss of burning rock, the sigh of escaping blastices, the quiet heartbeat of a fire that refuses to die. Centralia is gone, yet not gone. A town erased not by time, but by what lies beneath. And somewhere under that scorched earth, the fire still moves, searching for air, whispering to itself, "I'm still here." In northern Georgia, where pine forests meet rolling hills, there lies a lake that never seems still. The water shifts and ripples even on calm days, and at night it hums faintly, as if murmuring to itself. Locals call it Lake Lanier, but to those who know its story, it is something else entirely, a mirror of ghosts, a man-made sea built on top of the dead. The lake was created in the 1950s, a symbol of progress and power. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flooded the valley to build a reservoir that would supply water and electricity to Atlanta. More than 50,000 acres of farmland and a forest were drowned. Entire communities were relocated. Churches, barns, and cemeteries were moved, or promised to be. But when the waters rose, not everything was taken away. Beneath the surface still lie fragments of what came before, roads that lead nowhere, the remains of houses and the gravestones too heavy to move. They say the lake remembers. Even during construction, strange things happened. Workers reported hearing voices echoing through the half-flooded valley, calling names that weren't theirs. Equipment malfunctioned. One man claimed to see a figure standing in a field that no longer existed the next day. Then the water came, slow but unstoppable, climbing higher until the rooftops vanished. Since then, Lake Lanier has earned a darker reputation. More than 500 people have drowned there, many in calm water, many whose bodies were never recovered. Some say the lake pulls them down. Divers report catching glimpses of strange shapes, below trees still standing upright, their branches reaching toward the surface like hands. They speak of cold pockets of water that appear without warning, and of hearing the sound of church bells underwater. The town that once stood beneath the lake was called Oscarville. It was home to a thriving black community before being destroyed in the early 1900s after racial violence drove its residents away. Some believe the flooding of the area decades later was no coincidence, that the land itself carries the weight of what was done there. Locals whisper that the restless dead of Oscarville wander the shoreline, drawn to the place that erased them twice, once in life and once in honor. Boaters talk about sudden fog that forms in seconds, swallowing the surface in white mist. Engines stall, compasses spin, and for a few moments it feels as though the world has stopped moving. Those who survive such moments describe hearing faint music, like a hymn carried by wind. Search and rescue teams know the stories too. They say the lake has moods. It keeps what it wants. There are countless tales of phantom swimmers. A fisherman once told of seeing a woman in a blue dress floating near his boat. When he called out, she smiled and then disappeared beneath the surface without a ripple. Others speak of a truck driver who lost control on the bridge one rainy night and plunged into the water. When divers finally found the wreck, they discovered the headlights still burning, though the battery was dead. Skeptics say the accidents come from murky water, tangled debris, and poor visibility. The currents shift unpredictably. One wrong move and you're gone. But those who live nearby know better. They say the lake isn't dangerous, it's haunted. And not by one ghost, but by the memory of everything it buried. At night, the shoreline glows faintly, reflecting the lights of towns that never existed here before. Somewhere beneath the surface, a bell rings. Some say it's from one of the drowned churches. Others say it's the sound of the past reminding the living what it costs to forget. When the fog lifts at dawn, Lake Lanier looks peaceful again. Families fish from the docks. Jet skis cut across the water. The surface sparkles with sunlight, hiding everything it keeps. But if you ever find yourself there, drifting in the stillness, look down. You might see the outline of a roof, a road, or a name carved into stone. You might feel something brush against your leg, cold and soft as memory. And if you listen closely, you might hear the whisper that every local knows. The lake doesn't take life, it takes back what was always its own. High in the hills of Beverly Hills, surrounded by manicured gardens and whispering cypress trees, stands a house that looks like it belongs in another century. Gray stone walls rise above a fountain gone dry, and the air smells faintly of citrus and dust. This is Greystone Mansion, built for wealth, sealed by tragedy, and haunted by a silence that feels almost rehearsed. The mansion was completed in 1928, a gift from oil tycoon Edward L. Doheny Sr. to his son, Edward Ned Doheny Jr. It was one of the largest private homes ever built in California. 55 rooms, grand staircases, and the secret passageways connecting one side to another. Parties glittered through its halls. Politicians, movie stars, bankers, and criminals mingled under chandeliers that glowed like suns. But beneath the laughter, something darker stirred. Ned Doheny was no ordinary heir. He was caught in the shadow of scandal, the Teapot Dome corruption case that had shaken Washington. Alongside him was his friend and personal secretary, Hugh Plunkett. The two men had grown close, too close according to gossip, and by 1929, both were under enormous pressure. On the night of February 16th, everything unraveled. The household staff recalled hearing muffled voices from the guest suite around 10:30. Then, two sharp pops echoed through the mansion, too quiet for thunder, too loud for coincidence. Minutes later, Ned's wife Lucy sent a servant to investigate. When he entered the room, he found both men dead. Hugh lay near the doorway, a revolver still in his hand. Ned was sprawled beside the bed, a dark stain spreading across his silk pajamas. The official story was simple. Hugh had shot Ned, then turned the gun on himself. But from the beginning, the evidence disagreed. Ned's wound had no powder burns, meaning the gun had been fired from several feet away. Hugh's body was found at an angle that made self-infliction nearly impossible. Both men were dressed in sleepwear, yet Hugh had arrived fully clothed that night. Within hours, the mansion was sealed. Doctors signed the certificates without autopsies. By dawn, the bodies were embalmed, the scene erased. But some stains never fade. After the funerals, servants began hearing footsteps in the upper halls long after midnight, measured, pacing, almost thoughtful. Doors opened on their own. Light spilled from rooms left unlit. One maid reported seeing two figures standing at the end of a corridor, their backs turned, as if deep in conversation. When she called out, they vanished. Over the years, the mansion changed owners, but never moods. In the 1960s, a film crew shooting a scene there captured an unexplained reflection in a mirror, a man in period clothing who wasn't part of the production. Technicians blamed exposure errors, but others recognized the face. It looked like Hugh Plunkett. During another event, a pianist rehearsing in the drawing room stopped playing mid-song when a cold breeze brushed his neck. A moment later, a voice whispered, "Play it again." Visitors today describe a heavy presence in the guest suite where the shooting occurred. The room is kept closed most of the time. Those allowed inside report the faint scent of cigar smoke and engine oil, the smell of the 1920s, lingering in air that refuses to age. Some claim to hear quiet laughter from the hallway, glasses clinking, footsteps descending the stairs. They call it the midnight party, a gathering that never ends. Security guards have their own stories. One night, while making rounds, a guard noticed light glowing from the ballroom. When he opened the door, the music stopped and the chandeliers dimmed. The parquet floor, polished like a mirror, seemed to shimmer as though people had just been dancing there. He left, locked the door behind him, and swore never to return alone. Architecturally, Greystone is a masterpiece of symmetry and stone, but it feels alive in ways buildings shouldn't. The walls breathe with the rhythm of history. The rooms hold their breath between echoes. Maybe it isn't haunted by the men who died there, but by the life they left unfinished, the whispers, the scandal, the truth buried under elegance. At night, when the gardens fall quiet and the city lights flicker far below, the mansion glows faintly under the moon. Those who listen closely can hear faint piano notes drifting through the air, soft and deliberate. They say it's the same song that played on the night of the murders. The tune repeats, never ending, like a conversation waiting for an answer. Greystone Mansion does not keep ghosts. It keeps secrets. And every midnight, when the wind passes through its open windows, it throws another party for the dead. In the northern hills of London, beyond the quiet streets and brick walls, lies a place where the city ends and the shadows begin. Highgate Cemetery. A labyrinth of ivy, stone, and silence. Built in the 19th century as a garden of remembrance, it has become something else, a forest of the dead, where statues lean, angels weep, and the ground seems to shift underfoot. They say the graves move on their own. When it opened in 1839, Highgate was meant to be beautiful. The Victorians believed death deserved grandeur. Pathways curved through groves of cypress and yew. Marble crypts stood like palaces for the departed. The wealthy competed for space, building mausoleums with stained glass and wrought iron gates. Even in death, class followed them. But over the decades, London grew crowded, and so did its resting place. Highgate fell into neglect. The trees thickened. The ground sank. The cemetery began to swallow itself. Locals walking the perimeter reported strange sights, tombs that shifted position, headstones turned overnight, graves that seemed to breathe mist in summer air. Skeptics blamed erosion and roots. Believers whispered of something older, something alive beneath the soil. The city tried to reclaim it once, but the workers didn't stay long. They said their tools disappeared, their compasses spun, and their footprints filled with water seconds after being made. In the 1970s, the cemetery became infamous for another reason. Rumors spread of a tall figure stalking the overgrown paths at night. A shadow, with red eyes that glowed in the dark. Newspapers called it the Highgate Vampire. Paranormal investigators arrived. So did thrill seekers. They broke in after dark, armed with crucifixes and cameras. Some found only foxes and fog. Others swore they saw the figure gliding between graves, moving without sound, as though the air itself parted to let it through. One night in 1970, a group of men conducted a midnight vampire hunt. They carried torches and shovels, chanting prayers as they walked. At dawn they fled, white-faced and trembling. They said they had opened a tomb and found it empty, its coffin broken, its lid shattered from the inside. Whether hoax or hysteria, the story spread. For weeks afterward, visitors claimed the graves rearranged themselves. The paths twisted in new directions, and fresh dirt appeared where no digging had occurred. To this day, Highgate's layout confuses even the caretakers. Maps never seem to match the land. The Egyptian Avenue, with its columns carved into the hillside, feels endless. Walk it long enough, and you find yourself back where you began. The Circle of Lebanon, a ring of catacombs built around a cedar tree, hums faintly when the wind passes through. Some say the humming is the sound of the earth settling. Others say it's breathing. At night, fog rises from the ground like smoke, blurring the line between the living and the dead. Lantern light flickers against marble faces, and for a moment, they look alive again. Visitors have reported seeing candles burning inside sealed crypts, wax melting down from within the stone. The air smells of old roses and damp stone. Time stretches thin. You begin to feel watched not by one thing, but by hundreds of eyes carved in stone, waiting, patient. The strangest stories are not about ghosts, but about movement. Graves that realign themselves, crosses that twist to face the same direction. In 1985, a historian photographing the West Side returned days later to find an entire row of tombstones shifted 2 feet forward. The ground showed no disturbance. Even more unsettling, the inscriptions had changed subtly, dates off by a year, letters missing, as if rewritten by an unseen hand. Some say Highgate is restless because it remembers. Beneath its soil lie writers, rebels, children, and lovers, all buried within arm's reach of one another. The cemetery is alive with unfinished stories. The Victorians built it to defy time, but time defied them instead. If you ever walk through Highgate at dusk, follow the path, but never look back. The forest grows thicker behind you, and footsteps echo long after you stop. Somewhere deep within, a bell tolls softly, a sound no one has heard in years. The statues turn pale in the moonlight, their faces half sorrow, half warning. The wind shifts, and the graves seem to lean closer, as though listening. Highgate Cemetery does not haunt like other places. It rearranges itself, a living memory of everything buried and everything left unsaid. And when you leave its gates, the feeling follows you. The strange certainty that something beneath the city is still moving. Downtown Los Angeles has a way of swallowing time. The neon fades, the windows fog, and the city's heartbeat slows to a whisper after midnight. At the corner of Main Street and 7th stands a building that has watched it all boom, decay, and silence. The Cecil Hotel. From the outside, it looks ordinary. 14 stories of brick and light, a relic of the 1920s. But inside, history lingers like a perfume that never fades. The Cecil does not just hold guests, it keeps them. When it opened in 1927, the hotel was grand. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a lobby that smelled of tobacco and wealth. It was meant for traveling businessmen and movie stars, passing through a city on the rise. But the glamour didn't last. The Great Depression arrived, and the neighborhood around the hotel changed. Shadows grew longer. The Cecil adapted cheap rooms, long-term tenants, people the city preferred not to see. By the 1940s, it had become a refuge for the lost. Then came the deaths. In 1931, a man named W.K. Norton was found lifeless in his room. A bottle of poison on the nightstand. In 1934, another man shot himself in the head, leaving behind only a note that read, "I'm tired." Over the decades, the pattern continued: jumpers, overdoses, disappearance. Police stopped keeping track after 30. The building developed a reputation. Cursed, unlucky, haunted by sorrow. Locals began to call it the Suicide Hotel. But not all of its ghosts were metaphorical. In the 1980s, a man named Richard Ramirez, later known as the Night Stalker, lived on the top floor while terrorizing Los Angeles. He returned from his crimes through the back alley, stripped his blood-stained clothes in the dumpster, and walked through the lobby barefoot. No one asked questions. Years later, another serial killer from Austria, Jack Unterweger, stayed there, writing articles about crime, while committing murders of his own. Even after these horrors, the Cecil remained open. Cheap rent, no questions. And then, in 2013, came the story that would define it for a new generation. A young woman named Alyssa Lamb checked in while traveling alone from Canada. For days, guests complained about low water pressure and a strange taste from the taps. Maintenance workers climbed to the roof and found the source: Alyssa's body floating in the hotel's water tank. How she got there remains unclear. The doors to the roof were locked, alarmed, and heavy. Security footage from the elevator showed her behaving erratically, pressing multiple buttons, peering into the hallway, hiding as if from someone unseen. The clip went viral. Theories multiplied. But no answer came. Today, the Cecil stands half-renovated, renamed, but never reworn. Developers tried to erase its past with new paint and polished brass. But the air inside still feels thick, humid, electric, familiar. Those who visit describe odd sensations, time skipping, elevators stopping at wrong floors, reflections that linger a second too late. One tourist staying on the 7th floor reported hearing water running above him at night, though the tanks were sealed. Another swore he saw wet footprints leading from the stairwell to his door and fading halfway across the carpet. The hotel's staff won't talk about its history, but sometimes, when the night is quiet, the front desk phone rings without a caller. The line hisses, and a woman's voice asks, "What floor am I on?" Some say the Cecil is cursed by bad luck, others by the countless tragedies it's witnessed. But perhaps it's something simpler. Maybe a place that sees that much death stops being a building and becomes something else, a memory loop, playing the same story over and over. Guests check in. Some never leave. Some come back in dreams, pressing the same elevator buttons, waiting for the doors to close. If you walk past the hotel tonight, look up. You might see a single window glowing long after the rest go dark. Sometimes it flickers. Sometimes it stays. And sometimes, if you look closely enough, you'll see someone standing there, staring down a zone, waiting for the city to remember them. At the Cecil Hotel, every story begins the same way, with someone checking in. And sometimes it ends the same way too. The sea has no memory, but it never forgets. Somewhere in the narrow waters between Sumatra and Malaysia, a ship once drifted silently under a bright, empty sky. Its name was SSC Urang Medan. No one knows where it came from, or where it was going. All that remains is the signal it sent, a cry for help that still echoes through history. In June 1947, a Dutch cargo vessel sailing through the Strait of Malacca received a distress message crackling through the radio. The voice was faint, panicked. "All officers, including the captain, are dead," it said. "Possibly whole crew dead." Then, after a pause, came the final words, "I die." The signal went silent. Coordinates followed. Several ships in the area picked up the transmission, including an American vessel called the Silver Star. They set course toward the location. Hours later, they found the Urang Medan, floating aimlessly in calm seas. No smoke, no movement, no sound. The rescue team boarded, expecting survivors. What they found instead became one of the strangest maritime mysteries ever recorded. The entire crew was dead. Bodies lay scattered across the decks, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Eyes wide open, mouths agape, as if screaming at something invisible. Some pointed toward the sky, others clutched their chests, as though they had seen death itself approaching. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle. Even the ship's dog was found the same way, teeth bared, staring at nothing. The radio operator's corpse still sat upright in his chair, hand resting on the transmitter, his eyes locked on the horizon. Below deck, the air was thick with the smell of burning metal. The temperature was cold, unnaturally cold, despite the tropical sun outside. There was no fire damage, no leaks, no explanation. The rescuers found no cargo manifest, no documentation, not even a record of the ship's registration. It was as if the Orang Medan had appeared from nowhere. As the crew of the Silver Star prepared to tow the vessel to port, smoke began to rise from the cargo hold. Within minutes, an explosion ripped through the ship, forcing everyone to flee. The Orang Medan burst into flames, and then, almost gracefully, sank beneath the waves. It never surfaced again. Theories spread like tidewater. Some said the ship carried chemical weapons, remnants of the war hidden from authorities, and the crew had been poisoned by a leak. Others blamed carbon monoxide or methane from the hold. But these explanations couldn't account for the fear etched into the faces of the dead. Rumors grew darker, that the ship had encountered something it couldn't name. An entity, a weapon, or something not of this world. Decades later, researchers tried to verify the story. No official records of the Orang Medan exist in maritime registries. Some argue the name was mistranslated. Orang Medan means man from Medan in Malay. Perhaps it was an alias. Others suspect a cover-up, a ship erased to hide what it carried. Still, sailors crossing the strait whisper that on quiet nights, when fog drapes the water and radios hiss with static, a faint signal can sometimes be heard. It always says the same thing. All officers, including the captain, are dead. Modern ships have reported strange interference in the same region. Instruments malfunction, compasses spin, and disembodied Morse code pulses through the static. One freighter crew claimed to have seen a rusted vessel drifting through fog, its lights flickering weakly. When they drew closer, it vanished. The waters where it had been was calm and cold. Skeptics call it a myth born of sailors' fear, a ghost story passed down through generations. But the ocean keeps its secrets well. No one can prove the Orang Medan existed, and no one can prove it didn't. If you ever find yourself sailing through the Strait of Malacca at night, tune your radio to the emergency band. Listen closely. You might hear a faint signal, words lost in static. And if you do not answer. Because somewhere beneath the calm surface, under miles of dark water, a ship still drifts, its crew frozen forever, its distress call trapped in time, repeating again and again, waiting for someone to reply. In the far north of Japan, where the land narrows into silence and the sky hangs low with clouds, there rises a mountain that smells of the underworld. Mount Osore, Osorazan, the mountain of fear. For 1,000 years people have climbed its slopes, not to see beauty, but to face death. The air here is thick with sulfur. The earth steams. Rivers run milky white with minerals. And somewhere in the mist, it is said, the spirits of the dead are still waiting to cross. According to legend, Mount Osrise marks the gateway to the afterlife. It is one of Japan's most sacred and most unsettling places. At its heart lies a crater lake, Lake Usori. Its waters pale as bone. The soil around it is barren, cracked, and hot to the touch. Wind carries the stench of brimstone through the air. To many, It feels like standing on the edge of hell itself. But for centuries, pilgrims have come here to pray for the souls of the dead and to listen to the mountain, to the wind, to the voices that rise from between the stones. They come seeking the Itako, blind female mediums said to speak with the departed. Each summer, during the Osorazan Taisai festival, the Itako gather on the shore and perform Kuchiosa spirit summoning. Families line up for hours to hear messages from loved ones who have crossed over. The Itako speak in trembling voices, their words soft and fragmented. Mothers weep, children bow. And as they listen, the mountain exhales its slow, smoky breath, as though approving the reunion. But not all who come to Osore find peace. Some say that at night, the voices change. The wind turns colder, the air heavier. Travelers who camp nearby report hearing footsteps circling their tents, the crunch of gravel stopping inches from their ears. Others describe seeing faint blue flames flickering above the lake souls, they say, searching for the way across. In Buddhist tradition, spirits must cross a river called Sanzu no Kawa before reaching the afterlife. Here, that river is real. It flows beside the temple at the mountain's base, shallow but endless, filled with stones that pilgrims stack into small towers. Each stone represents a prayer for a child who died young, a life unfinished. The story goes that these children must pile stones to atone for their early death. But demons come at night to knock them down. The wind that sweeps across the shore carries the sound of shifting pebbles, a quiet, endless labor of the lost. Monks tend the temple year-round, surrounded by sulfur and silence. They say the mountain never sleeps, even when the air is still. Wisps of smoke rise from unseen vents in the earth, as if the mountain is breathing. Earthquakes shudder through the valley every few years, and the lake changes color, from white to turquoise to grayish, if mirroring the moods of the dead. Visitors who come expecting horror often leave with something different, a profound, uneasy calm. Osorazan doesn't frighten in the way haunted places do. It humbles. Standing there, with the sound of boiling water beneath your feet and the clouds moving low across the crater, you feel small, temporary. The line between life and death thins until it disappears entirely. Locals say that on misty mornings, when the temple bells ring, the mountain listens. The smoke drifts in spirals, wrapping around the statues of Jisesizo, the guardian of children's souls. If you bow and whisper the name of someone you've lost, the wind might change direction, carrying your words upward. No one knows where they go, only that they are heard. At night, the mountain grows darker, the air thick with heat and silence. The moon turns pale through the haze, somewhere deep below. Fire breathes through stone. And then you understand why they call it Osorezanot, for fear of death, but for reverence. It is the mountain that breathes smoke, a living border between worlds, exhaling the memory of everyone who has ever walked its slopes. If you visit, tread lightly. The ground is warm beneath your feet, as though pulsing with a slow heartbeat. And if you feel a breath against your cheek, though no one stands beside you, do not be afraid. It is only the mountain, reminding you that it's alive, and that someday, perhaps, it will remember your name too. In the rolling farmland of northern Tennessee, along the banks of the Red River, there is a cave that locals say was never meant for the living. Its mouth opens low, beneath the limestone bluffs. A dark wound in the earth, surrounded by whispering trees. Even on the brightest summer day, sunlight will not touch its floor. They call it the Bell Witch Cave, a place where legends still breathe, and where even light seems afraid to enter. The story begins over 200 years ago, with the Bell family. In 1804, John Bell and his wife Lucy settled in Adams, Tennessee, to farm the fertile land near the river. For years they prospered. But in 1817, strange things began to happen in their home. Knocking on the walls, scratching beneath the floorboards, objects moving by themselves. The disturbances grew bolder. Whispered voices, laughter from empty rooms, and unseen hands that tugged at the children's hair. The entity soon revealed itself. It spoke in a voice that shifted from woman to man to child, calling itself Jesse. It claimed to be the spirit of a local woman, wronged by John Bell, though others said it was older, something elemental. The Bell Witch, as she came to be known, tormented the family for years. She sang hymns, recited sermons, and mocked visitors. She predicted the future, repeated private conversations, and claimed she would kill John Belland in 1820. He died after drinking from a mysterious vial found on his bedside table. The voice laughed and declared victory. After John's death, the activity faded, but it never ended. Locals said the witch retreated to the cave on the Bell property, promising to return one day. The cave became a place of pilgrimage for the curious and the brave. Those who entered told of cold air that swallowed light, of whispers rising from the stone, of touches on their shoulders when no one stood behind them. During the Civil War, soldiers camped nearby. Several entered the cave and emerged trembling, claiming they'd seen a woman's figure dissolve into mist. One dropped his rifle and ran without looking back. The others swore the torches dimmed the moment they stepped inside. Even now, visitors say flashlights flicker and batteries drain within minutes. Photographs blur. The temperature plummets, and a sense of being watched follows you from the entrance to the deepest chamber. Some hear faint singing, an old frontier hymn. Others hear laughter. A few feel something grab their wrists in the dark. The cave itself is small, barely 60 feet deep, its walls slick with moisture. At the far end lies a narrow crawl space, known as the Bell Witch's resting place. No one has ever reached its end. Explorers report that the air grows thick, like water, and their lights refuse to shine forward. They turn back, choking, eyes watering from the stench of sulfur and decay. Scientists call it a natural phenomenon. The cave's structure, they say, bends air currents and traps heat, creating a vacuum that extinguishes flames and disorients travelers. But locals believe differently. They say the witch is still there, waiting. She is the reason no light survives inside. Her laughter, they say, is the last sound you hear before darkness swallows everything. The Bell Witch's legend has seeped into American folklore. It's said that Andrew Jackson himself once visited the Bell farm, curious about the haunting. As his wagon approached the property, the wheels froze. The horses refused to move. A voice rang out from the trees. "You may proceed, General, but I'll see you again in the White House." He left before nightfall. Today, the Bell Witch Cave is a tourist attraction, open for tours during the day. Guides tell the story with practiced charm, but the fear in their eyes is real when they reach the entrance. They never linger after sunset. The air changes. The forest falls silent. And if you stand at the mouth of the cave, the darkness seems to breathe, pushing out warm air, pulling in cold, as though the earth itself is alive. At dusk, the river reflects the fading sky. The limestone glows faintly, but the cave remains black. No light enters, none escapes. Locals say it's because the witch took the first light that dared to enter and never returned it. They say she feeds on it, on warmth, on sound, on courage. If you ever visit, take only one step inside and listen. You'll hear it, a faint whisper, curling through the dark, neither welcome nor warning. Come closer, it says. But do not. Because in the Bell Witch Cave, even light has learned to stay away. In the dense forests north of Prague, stands a castle built to guard nothing. No village nearby, no trade route to protect, no border to defend. It rises from a sheer rock cliff, its walls thick, its windows narrow, its gates facing inwards, if to keep something inside. The locals call it Hauska Castle, but old maps list no name at all. They say the builders weren't protecting the land. They were sealing it. According to legend, the castle was erected in the 13th century over a hole in the ground, pit, so deep that no one could find its bottom. Birds that flew above it would fall dead mid-air. Animals refused to go near. Those who peered into its depths swore they heard screaming from below, and sometimes laughter. The villagers believed it was a gateway to hell. When the local ruler ordered a fortress built on top of it, the first stones were laid, not to defend against men, but against whatever lived beneath the earth. The story goes that before construction began, prisoners sentenced to death were offered a choice: their freedom, if they would descend into the pit and report what they saw. The first man agreed. He was lowered on ropes into the darkness, torch in hand. After only a few moments, he began to scream. When the men pulled him back up, his hair had turned white, his eyes wild. He babbled about creatures with wings and claws, and faces like stone. He died 2 days later, never coherent again. The castle rose directly over the hole. The chapel was built on the spot, its floor covering the mouth of the pit. Frescoes from the time still decorate its walls. Angels with swords drawn, creatures half human, half beast. One figure is particularly strange: an angel holding a spear, stabbing something invisible beneath the surface. Scholars say it's symbolic. Locals say it's not. Over the centuries, Hauska Castle changed hands many times. Every owner tried to erase its legend, and yet the same stories returned. Servants reported footsteps echoing through sealed corridors. Horses refused to approach the courtyard. At night, strange lights flickered through the windows of the chapel. In the 15th century, alchemists sought entry, claiming the pit was a portal to knowledge. During the Second World War, the Nazis occupied the castle, drawn by its myths. They dug beneath the chapel, but never revealed what they found. When they fled, the tunnels were sealed once more. Today, the pit still lies beneath the chapel floor. The stone slabs are cracked, and when you stand there, the temperature drops sharply, as if the air below is breathing. Tour guides speak quietly about it. They say nothing grows in the soil near that part of the castle. Birds perch on every tower except that way. Those who visit often leave feeling dizzy, their dreams filled with images of wings and fire. The castle's design itself seems to defy logic. Windows overlook walls instead of landscapes. Doors open into cliffs. Stairways end abruptly. The architecture feels confused, as though the builders forgot their purpose midway through construction. Some historians believe it was deliberate, a way to disorient whatever might emerge from beneath. But others claim the confusion isn't in the design. It's in the castle itself. Hauska, they say, forgets. Locals tell of a strange phenomenon. The longer you stay, the more you lose track of time. Compasses spin, watches stop, and conversations fade. Visitors forget why they entered certain rooms. Names slip from memory. Even the castle's own title, Hauska, has shifted in spelling and pronunciation over centuries, as though the structure keeps rewriting its identity. Some call it a defense mechanism, others a curse. At dusk, the courtyard falls silent. The air grows heavy, and from beneath the chapel floor comes a faint low and rhythmic, like the beating of wings. Sometimes the hum turns to whispers, words in a language no one recognizes. Guides say it's the wind moving through cracks in the stone. The villagers who live nearby say otherwise. They say it's the castle remembering, and forgetting at the same time. If you stand at the edge of the forest and look toward its towers, Hauska seems perfectly ordinary, a fairy tale fortress glowing in the evening light. But once you cross its gates, you understand. The silence feels too deep. The shadows fall in the wrong direction. And somewhere, beneath your feet, something is waiting. They built the castle to seal it away. They covered the pit. They freezed it. But maybe the door was never meant to be closed. Maybe it simply forgot how to open. And maybe that's why the air around Hauska still trembles, because the castle itself is dreaming, trying to remember its name. In the wild heart of the Scottish Highlands, where the mountains fold into mist and the air tastes of rain and stone, lies a lake that seems to have no bottom. Loch Morar, dark, still, ancient. It stretches like a mirror between the hills, its surface calm even in storm. The locals say it is a place where the world grows thin, where reflections last longer than they should, and where the dead are not as quiet as we think. Loch Morar is one of the deepest lakes in Europe, plunging more than 1,000 feet below the surface. Its water is clear, yet darker than ink, absorbing light and sound alike. Scientists say the lake's depth creates unique conditions, temperatures that never change, currents that move in slow spirals. But the people who live along its shore tell another story. They say the darkness below isn't just water. It's memory. The legend begins long before science ever came to the highlands. For centuries, fishermen spoke of something living beneath the loch, a creature they called Morag. Unlike her famous cousin Nessie, Morag was no tourist myth. Her sightings came from men who made their living on the lake, men who had no need for stories. They described a long shape, gray and silent, breaking the surface on moonless nights. Some said she was a serpent, others a guardian. And some whispered that she wasn't an animal at all, but the spirit of the drowned, bound together into one eternal shape. The first recorded encounter came in 1887, when two fishermen were said to have struck the creature with an oar. It screamed, a sound like a metal tearing, and vanished beneath the waves. Since then, sightings have continued. Always at dusk, always when the lake is calm enough to reflect the sky perfectly, as though the surface itself is a doorway. Modern explorers have sent sonar into Loch Morar. The readings show massive moving shapes that vanish halfway through a scan. Equipment malfunctions. Cameras shut down. Divers who have ventured deep describe a strange stillness, as if the water is thicker than it should be. One man surfaced shaking, unable to speak for hours. When he finally did, he said, "It was like looking into a mirror that looks back." Locals connect the legend to the lake's history. During the Highland clearances, families were forced from their homes, their cottages burned, their dead left behind. Many fled across the loch by night, their boats vanishing into fog, and some never reached the far shore. Their descendants say the spirits still wander beneath the water, their faces appearing in the reflection on quiet evenings. If you see them, they say, do not look twice, because the second time, the reflection isn't yours. The village near Loch Morar is small now, more ghosts than people. Yet the stories remain. On windless nights, the water moves on its own, small ripples forming circles that widen and wide. Sometimes from the hills, a low hum can be heard, like a voice carried through sneezing. Shepherds who camp nearby speak of lights under the surface, white and white, gliding in slow patterns. Scientists call it bioluminescent algae. The locals call it the procession of gulls. What makes the loch most unsettling is its silence. Stand on the shore, and every sound seems to die before it reaches the water. Throw a stone, and the splash feels muffled, swallowed whole. The reflection stares back, perfect and still, showing not just your face, but something behind it, shadows that move when you don't. There's a saying in Morar: the lake does not take, it remembers. Every boat that sinks, every life lost, becomes part of it. Some say Morag herself is not one creature, but all of them together. The collective memory of the dead, rising in the form of what we fear most. She appears not to harm, but to remind. At dawn, when the mist lifts, Loch Morar looks peaceful again. Just water and hills and the Skeefty. But if you watch closely, the reflection lingers a heartbeat too long after the wind passes Sifus. The surface ripples, then stills, as if something beneath just turned over in its sleep. If you ever visit, resist the urge to lean over the edge. The water will tempt you. It always does, with its perfect stillness, its mirror-black surface. But the locals will tell you what their ancestors learned long ago. Reflections are not meant to last that long. Because in Loch Morar, when you look too long into the water starts to look back. Deep within the Amazon basin, surrounded by a forest so dense that even satellites struggle to see through it, lies a story that has no beginning and no end. The story of Hoher Verdea town that vanished. According to those who have searched for it, there are no ruins, no records, not even a trail. Yet every so often, travelers speak of lights flickering deep in the jungle, like lanterns moving along streets that no longer exist. They say the town still appears at night. The legend began in 1923, when a Brazilian military patrol reportedly stumbled upon the settlement of Huerta Verde while surveying remote territory near the border of Peru. The town was small, about 600 people, mostly farmers and traders. Or it should have been. When the soldiers arrived, they found the buildings intact, doors unlocked, food half-cooked on stoves. Chickens wandered the streets, but there were no people, not one. Every home was empty, as if its occupants had stepped outside and never returned. In the schoolhouse, they found a blackboard covered in chalk. Written across it in Portuguese were the words, "Não há salvação aqui." There is no salvation here. The soldiers searched for days. No signs of struggle, no bodies, no footprints leaving town. Even the forest seemed undisturbed, as though the world itself had swallowed the villagers whole. When they radioed for orders, the signal faded into static. The next morning, the commander reported hearing voices echoing from the trees, murmurs, laughter, fragments of conversation that dissolved when approached. He ordered a retreat. Official records of the incident are sparse. Some claim they were destroyed, others that they never existed. But the story persisted, passed down through locals who speak of the Cidade Fantasma, the ghost city. Hunters claim that on certain nights, when the moon is low and the air heavy with mist, the forest glows faintly, revealing outlines of streets and rooftops between the trees. Some even say they've heard the bell of the old church toll, once before fading into silence. Researchers who have searched for Huerta Verde call it a myth. Maps from that period show no settlement by that name. But there are oddities, references to a nearby river that no longer flows, accounts of a small town that received mail from the city of Manaus and then abruptly stopped. Some explorers found remnants of brick foundations half buried in soil. Others found nothing at all. Theories abound. One claims the villagers fled during the political violence of the 1920s, vanishing into the forest to escape persecution. Another blames a sudden landslide or disease. A third suggests something stranger, that the town slipped out of time, that it exists now only when the forest allows it. In 1953, a pilot flying over the region at dusk reported seeing lights arranged in a perfect grid, a town glowing where maps showed only jungle. When he circled back moments later, the lights were gone. He insisted it was not a hallucination. It looked alive, he said. And then it wasn't. Locals living near the area tell similar stories. Hunters have followed distant music only to find empty clearings. Some return carrying dirt that glows faintly for days. Others never return at all. The indigenous tribes of the region speak of the forest that remembers, a place where human footsteps are temporary, and the earth reclaims what it lent to the living. Even now, Hoyer Verde remains untraceable. Satellite imagery shows nothing but endless green. The coordinates recorded by early explorers lead to different locations every time. GPS devices malfunction. Compasses spin. And yet those who have been there, those few insist the town is real. One man, a geologist from Sao Paulo, claimed he entered its ruins one night and saw shadows moving behind windows, heard voices speaking softly in Portuguese, and smelled bread baking. He turned away for a moment, and when he looked again, the town was gone. If Hoyer Verde still exists, it belongs not to the living, but to the hours between midnight and dawn. A town trapped in perpetual twilight, visible only when darkness is deep enough to hide its truth. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it's still waiting for the people who left. The forest here is patient. It listens. It remembers. And sometimes, when the moonlight falls just right, it shows a glimpse of what its hiding street corner. A lamplight. The sound of children laughing in the distance. But by the time you reach it, the sound is gone, and the trees are all that remain. Hoyer Verde. A town erased from maps but not from memory. A place that exists only at night, and only for those who still believe that some ghosts do not haunt people, they haunt places.